Of last legislation,
Roll call.
roll call.
This is for the Joint Revenue Committee meeting on Monday, June 8th. Senator Case. Senator Dockstader. Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Campbell. Representative Lean. Here. Representative Lucas.
Present.
Representative Riggins. Representative Storer. Representative Stivar. Representative Worf. Co-Chairman Locke.
Present.
Chairman McEwen.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Mr. Gill, you ready? Josh, are you ready?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Josh Anderson, LSO. So for this first section this morning, we're just going to talk a little about a review of the efforts of this committee and the legislature to provide some property tax relief in recent history. And so, as you recall, the legislature has done several things to provide some property tax relief to the taxpayers, implemented the 4% property tax cap. Then there's a 25% homeowner exemption, and then a 50% long-term homeowner exemption. And then also the legislature passed and was passed by the people Amendment A, which split residential property from all other property for purposes of taxation, property taxation. So just for this section this morning, one of the things we're going to do is look at some of the efforts of this committee last session related to those topics. So the first bill on the list was Senate File 77, homeowner property tax exemption revisions. So this is related to that 25% homeowner exemption. And so if you recall, in the first year of the exemption, to get that up and running right away, it applied to all residential property. Beginning in the 2026 tax year, then that would only apply to property where the person claiming the exemption actually resided for not less than 8 months of the year. And as you recall, then to administer that, the department and the assessors had to essentially require people to apply to prove that they live in that property for 8 months of the year. So the bill last year that this committee did on page 2, starting on line 11, struck all that language related to needing to reside in the property for 8 months of the year, which would then have removed that requirement to apply for that exemption. So it would then apply to all properties. So that was that first bill, Mr. Chairman. I'd take any questions, or I don't know if you want me to go through all these or how you want to proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Questions?
All right, next bill, Mr. Chairman, was Senate File 78. And this was essentially the implementation of Amendment A, which again, as I noted before, split residential property from the all other property class. So you'll see on page 2 there, it just creates residential real property as a separate class, and then it would have established the rate, the taxable value rate at 8.3% compared to 9.5%, which is the current rate. Then bottom of page 2, just a definition of what consists of residential real property. And then on page 3, simply adding that same residential property class in a separate spot, establishing the rate at 8.3%. So that was that bill, Mr. Chairman. Then the final bill in this category from last year was House Bill 45. This was one that did pass, and this was related to the long-term homeowner exemption. And you'll see at the bottom of page 1 there, the first change this made was putting a cap on the amount of the exemption so that it only applies to the first $3 million of the fair market value of the property. Over to page 2, it changes the definition of primary residence, and this is particularly so that if someone sells their residence and then purchases another residence in Wyoming, the months residing in both residences apply to the requirement to reside in the property for 8 months. And then it also added a new subsection, a subparagraph D, which just allows to the person, once you qualify in 1 year, you can continue to qualify if you just contact the assessor's office and confirm that you still meet the requirements. And then a new subparagraph E, and this is related to, and I think we'll talk about this a little later today, that if the voters approve the initiative to implement a homeowner's property tax exemption and the person applies for that exemption, they would not qualify for the long-term homeowner's exemption. So you could only get one of those 2 exemptions.
Quick question,
Yes, sir.
just kind of clarify for everybody. People have a choice, right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
They can
Yeah.
take the 25% and the land, or the 50% just on the structure, should this pass.
I believe that's correct, Mr. Chairman. So from my understanding on the initiative, that would be 50%, but just on the structure, not the land. This long-term homeowner exemption is 50% of both of those, but so if you would qualify for both, you would likely take the long-term homeowner exemption instead, but again, it would be the choice of the taxpayer.
One last follow-up. During the next session, we have the ability to include the land in there also, right?
Mr. Chairman, the legislature will have the ability to review the initiative if it passes and make amendments both to the initiative and to existing statutes to kind of clarify how that will all work together.
Thank you.
So that's essentially what I had, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sackett has some additional information, or I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just real quickly, I wanted to be clear. The version that you presented here today, was that the version that was actually enacted, or was this the version? So is this the way it was enacted? So it included the language changes that we see where we made it to where if a person sells their house, they still see the benefit. All of those were part of the enacted legislation, correct?
Excuse me, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is the version that was enrolled and enacted into law. So everything I just described was what passed, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I just wanted to make sure we had that covered because I think it did get some minor modification or a couple of minor amendments, and I wanted to make sure that we were covered with what we were looking at exactly. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yeah. So in the House, there was the amendment that added the $3 million cap. So that was an additional amendment to the House Bill 45 as it went through. And then you may recall Joint Conference Committee, which a fair number of you were on the Joint Conference Committee to resolve the differences between the House and Senate for House Bill 45. And that was that addition in E. You got in the Joint Conference Committee, you added the language about the People's Initiative and not getting both. So that came out of the Joint Conference Committee. So those were the 2 major changes to the legislation as it passed. But so both of those are in there and were part of the final bill as it was approved.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming today and thank you for preparing these. My question is about the ballot initiative, just since we have it as a topic right at the moment. You mentioned that we could amend it on the floor during the session in the spring if it was to pass. My question is, how far could that amendment go? Does the original intent of the voters need to stay there, or could the 50% be changed to something else?
Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent question, and I don't know that I have an exact answer. I mean, I think if you look at the constitutional language, or maybe it's in statute, I'd have to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman. But I think it just says the legislature may make amendments as other laws, but may not repeal it until 3 years passes. But I'll find that exact language and I'll send that to the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you guys for being here today. Just real quick question on this Senate File 78, where we separated residential from and made it 8.3% versus 9.5%. When does that officially take effect? That 8.3% is my question. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman and Senator Ide, so that one did not pass this last session. So that was something that this committee had sent forward to the body, but it did not pass. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Yeah, real quick. Thank you for that. And that's what, this bill said January 26, obviously, and the bill didn't pass. If it did pass, what would that effective date, what would it have been? Would it started for the tax year 2026? Is that how that would work? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that was the intent of the bill, to have it apply to the 2026 tax year.
Thank you.
Co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you guys have the numbers? So with the change to Senate File 77, with the differences between the first year and the second year, do you guys have any stats on, I know it's a little bit difficult because we're talking about owner occupied, but I guess one of the things, and we may not have the numbers here today, but it is something I think the committee should be aware of. It would be important for us to understand, because I know there was massive confusion with the voters, which, okay, probably the people up here are responsible for that, so I get to take the full blame. But that being said, I know a lot of people who potentially qualified for that didn't get a chance to get, I shouldn't say didn't get a chance, did not sign up. And we're just trying to understand how many people signed up for it in the first year. In the second year, and I know this is a tricky split, so I'm not sure I know exactly, but in the second year, how many voters do we think we left behind that qualified that did not get a chance to register? Have you guys been able to do any analysis on that? And again, I realize we may not have been specific, but any of that analysis would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, I can talk a little bit to that, but then DOR might want to come talk as well. Mr. Gale ran for the Hills. The very first year, everybody qualified. So, across the board, everyone got the 25%. I know, talking with DOR a little bit, now with the, having to live as a primary residence owner occupied, on average around the state, that's about 70%, 72% of residences are owner occupied. So that cuts, about 30% off of that. And I think, according to last numbers I kind of had from Department of Revenue, somewhere around 44 to 50% of the people that we expected to apply and could have got it did. So, maybe 50% of the people that could receive that only are the ones that applied. It's about 50%. And he can clear that up a little bit maybe, but 44 to 50% I think actually applied. So those people had received it before because they automatically were granted, and this year didn't apply. So if that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So somewhere in 44 to 50% of the people we expected. So roughly about half of that 70%-ish is what we think, people who we think actually did the affidavit and actually signed up. So we're, for lack of a better term, we're missing half of the people who theoretically could have gotten the exemption. Some maybe by choice and others maybe not intentional. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Some of those I think did apply for long-term homeowners. So I think long-term homeowner from stuff we've seen has grown some. So there's a nuances there, but yeah, I think that's accurate.
One quick question. Of the long-term versus the 25% and everybody who applied, where do you think we landed on a percentage statewide? Probably not a fair question, but thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to defer to Department of Revenue probably in terms of what they think the total might be.
Any other questions?
I think he's gonna.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We can call him back up. Yeah, I would. Matt. Mr. Sackett. You want to come back up here? Can you walk us through the memo you prepared?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Do you want to have Mr. Gill comment quickly about the follow-up question on long-term and 25%?
Please, Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken Gill, Department of Revenue, Property Tax Division. Mr. Sackett was 100% correct. About 44% of eligible property owners on the 25% received it. So there's some sheets that were provided to you this morning, and it's labeled 2026 Assessed Residential Exemptions. It looks like this, Mr. Chairman. Okay, the very first sheet is 2026. And if you look at the third column in where it says homeowners exemption, you'll see that 462 million and some change was exempted in 2026. If you go to the second sheet, same column, you'll find that 1.4 billion was exempted in 2025. So if you take 72% of the 1.4 billion, that leaves you with approximately $1 billion, and we exempted 462 million. So it's somewhere between 44 and 46%. Now with the long-term homeowners, it was provided to you this morning also. It has grown. It grew by about 4,000 applicants statewide. When I pulled the numbers on June 3rd, keeping in mind these are still draft numbers. There may be some counties still processing those applications because we know that folks had till the fourth Monday in May to apply for the long-term homeowners. So they may still be processing some of those applications. So don't if you leave with this number, it might change in the future. So between the 25% and long-term homeowners, I think you're looking at around probably 65% to 70% of eligible applicants received one or the other. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Co-Chairman Law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Gill. I appreciate that. And Mr. Sackett, thank you as well. I really appreciate you guys giving us those numbers. But real quick, on these numbers, Mr. Gill, would you do us a favor too, when you produce these, would you do us a favor by helping us? These are assessed values. And sorry, if you could just do the actual, as close as you can, the revenue numbers, it's a little easier for us to look and say, okay, the revenue was impacted by this much. The assessed number throws me off a little bit. I must confess, when you threw the numbers out first, I thought to myself, 1.4 billion, and I thought, oh, that's assessed value. And then immediately I'm trying to figure out how to scramble the number. So when you get a chance, if you could give us the tax, I know it's an estimate because you're always pulling it with all the mills, but if you could use those same numbers to give us close in the ballpark of the tax, that would be helpful. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to do that. Would you like it for each exemption? Or, because I did do a total on the sheet that was provided this morning.
okay.
There's a total of all of the exemptions. So that would be the 4% cap. That would be the 25%
So
homeowners
you did it
exemption
for, okay.
and the 50% long-term homeowners. And then we just use the average mill levy for the county. And so we have the exempted tax dollars. In 2025, the exemption amount was estimated at 190 million. And in 2026, the estimate is 140 million.
Never mind. That's the one I was looking for. And I was just looking at the wrong spreadsheet. Thank you. I just wanted to be able to see it in tax numbers so I could make sense of it. But thank you. That's helpful. So
Follow up?
thank you. Just so a follow up. So it looks like roughly, so the difference is that roughly 40 million from last year to this year is roughly what we're looking at in there. Because I think we predicted the 190 was pretty close to what we actually estimated when those bills went in. That was one of our estimates, or pretty close ballpark. And so now it's that 140 this year is the estimate.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that is correct. It is at about 140 million. And of course, these are still draft numbers because the numbers are coming in from the state board as we speak.
Mr. Sackett?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Matt Saccadella. So I prepared a memo just basically on the property taxes and a couple other questions. There's some short explanations there in the different numbers. One of the main pieces was that first appendix, which is kind of the property tax summary matrix. So in that, Ken and I actually used this when we were working on these last year to try to keep them straight and what affected what. So we expanded the appendix 1, which is that matrix, to provide further information, which has links to all the bills as well. Then there's a whole set of appendices, which are the actual bills, which you guys have, in various other ways as well. Getting into kind of the meat of the discussion, and I don't know if you guys want to talk about real estate transfer tax and some of those things now. That's in the memo, where I can talk about them later.
Yeah, we can cover that later.
Okay. So the summary matrix goes through, all the different bills. And then at the end, there is some additional information. The very last 3 pages of the memo have, Appendix 14 has the historical average residential fair market value by county. And so that's just kind of a listing of the fair market value by county. And you'll notice in 2024 and 2025, it does have both the full fair market value and then the value after the exemptions. It then also shows a percentage change, from 2015 to 2025, both with and without those exemptions. So that's going to show you the increase, in fair market value from 2015 forward. And you'll notice probably in there a lot of variation between, different counties. Pick, your county or your favorite counties, and there's a lot of variation. Obviously Teton County, huge amounts of growth. Other counties as well, and some didn't increase nearly as much. Appendix 15 really is just a history of the historical mill levies by county, showing, some variation, but relatively consistent mill levies. And then Appendix 16 provides information on assessed value and percentage change. So each year it shows the assessed value for each county and then the percentage change. So you can see, from 2019 forward, so some big jumps, overall in 21, and 22, some jump increases on average 8.6%, 22% almost, 20% in 2023. And then obviously with the exemption, some larger drops in 2025 of 18.4%.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Sack.
Mhm.
We have any public comment? Ms. Huxtable?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor. Good morning, everyone. Really don't have a lot of comments except to reiterate what was already said. What has happened in the last couple of years with property tax relief really has taxpayers confused. They don't really know what to ask for. They don't know what to expect. We are doing our very best to put it on the tax notices so that they can see it and then try to explain it. It's very, very confusing. So anything that we can do to simplify that or not change too much again so that we have to start all over again is a good thing for your taxpayers, just for transparency purposes. But we'll administer whatever you deem is appropriate.
Would it be very confusing if we just did away with property tax?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it would be very confusing for those people that rely on that residential property tax to fund their services.
Questions? Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Ms. Huxtable, for being here. I appreciate that. Do you have for the people who have figured out they've missed it, and maybe for those who haven't, give us a feel for people come to your office, said, I didn't get my 25%. How much of that have you seen this year? I mean, I'm sure people are very frustrated, but just give us a general feel for how many people are coming in, how are they finding out? What is people's response? Because I'm confident we're talking about best case 50%, people who could have had, well, maybe not. I guess when you take the 67%, let's just say at least 30% of the people probably missed their exemption. And how much of that are you seeing out there?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee, we're hearing a lot about it. We've had quite a few individuals in each county come forward. However, at the end of the appeal deadline, from what I understand, we probably have maybe a handful across the state that are actually going to an appeal process on that 25%. There was a lot of questions. There was a lot of confusion. Assessors across the state did, I think, a lot of work to make sure that taxpayers knew that starting last fall with tax notices. Treasurers worked with us to get it on the tax bills, giving a deadline, public notices, public meetings, radio announcements. So we did a lot to put the word out there, but you're right. There was a lot that missed it or didn't know about it. And there is some confusion. For the most part, people were upset a little bit, but they said, when can we sign up next year? And we give them the date and the website to get signed up, and we've already got that process started. So yes, there was some, and there will probably be some appeals that are specific to that 25%. Don't know where that will end up, but there is probably less than a dozen statewide that I'm aware of that actually did that. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't some pretty unhappy, but it was pretty clear what the deadlines were, and everybody, including, I think, legislators, send out some notices to their taxpayers. So a lot of frustration, but for the most part, people said, okay, we'll just make sure we get it next year.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Dockstader.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your report. You mentioned the word confusion. As we walk away from this now, is there anything left that we need to clean up on the confusing part of it for people?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Dockstader, I don't have a good feel for exactly what needs to happen, except less change is better. You've made some changes as far as dates and timelines and processes, and we've shared that with the taxpayers as far as the deadline being March 1st, as far as being able to apply, what the website is, setting it up within our counties. In my county, I have a specific computer designated for that they can come to the counter. So we've already started those wheels in motion. Have been doing it for about a year, and most counties have something similar. So anything that we do to change that now would be more confusion. I just would like to kind of let us do status quo and see how we get through another year with all the notices that we've put out there. The Department of Revenue has worked on rules, promulgating rules, because there was emergency rules in place. I know they've got that started. We've worked closely with them to make sure that we have that language ingrained in us so we know what to tell the folks, trying to make things consistent as far as the residency requirements between the different exemptions, the deadlines being similar. All of that just helps kind of settle that confusion. So anything that we would do to change that, I think would just add to more confusion at this point.
Senator Ide.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. You're talking about the confusion here. It was a good question. Do you think that the initiative this fall on the ballot, you said no more further confusion. Do you think that could potentially streamline the confusion if that passes this fall? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, that's just part of the confusion that's already out there because they're not sure where that plays. And to be honest, we don't know because we only know what was in statute already. So in the bills that passed this last session, you included some language about the House Bill 45 that eliminated the long-term homeowners from competition. Of course, the 4% cap is still out there. Don't know how that's going to pan out. The 25%, no adjustment was made within the law that if the People's Initiative passed, what would happen to the 25%. I'm not a lawyer, but my legal sense tells me that should the People's Initiative pass, people could be eligible for both it and the 25% as the law currently reads. So we're just adding more confusion. I think if the People's Initiative was to pass, I think there's a lot of work to be done at legislation to keep it from being even more confusing than it is currently. Not to say it's better or worse. I'm just saying that we get a lot of people that come in, even legislators that come in and say, what can I apply for? I don't even know what's available out there. And we try to walk them through every process. And the People's Initiative, as I understand it, as it's written, is an application process, as is the long-term homeowners. So those are two processes that they apply for. The 25%, they have to fill out an affidavit that says they live in their home and then they qualify. So a lot of moving parts, and until the People's Initiative passes or fails, we don't really know what we're going to be dealing with come the first day of December or the first day of January 2027.
Josh, we hemmed that up pretty good in the legislation, didn't we? One or the other, there's no way they could get both.
Mr. Chairman, we added that language to the long-term homeowners one. I think there's not currently similar language in the 25% homeowner exemption. So that's something that would need to be addressed this session if the initiative passes.
So we need to clean that up.
Yes, sir. If the initiative passes, I think we will need to do that.
Can we have something ready in case it does? Thank you. Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you today, Ms. Huxtable. Thank you for joining us. You too. I have a couple of questions, and the first one I want to talk about is the refund program. Could you tell me, as the assessor's office, when folks come in and say that they've missed the deadline for either the long-term homeowners or the 25%, do the assessors talk to them about the refund program?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, good to see you as well. Yes, we do. And for most part, in the counties, the treasurers and the assessors are working very closely together. I could speak specifically to Commerce County. I have my treasurer with me. Everybody that paid property taxes starting with October 1st of last year, he sent them to my office to see what was available. And if they missed the deadline in my office, I sent them to his office for the property tax relief program. So yes, there is a concerted effort to do that. To make sure that they're aware that there's multiple programs available and trying to get them focused to the right spot.
All,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My next question isn't about that at all. It has to do with the assessors and the equal application of the law. So when we have individuals that have missed the deadlines, are all assessors making sure that we're following the emergency rules promulgated by the Department of Revenue? Or are there some interesting situations that come about, because I've learned that property taxes are not uniform in any way? Do we have a way to make sure that the assessors are following in equal application of the law across all counties?
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, as far as I know, that is correct, which is why you would see some appeals out there, is because the assessors all met in January and we all understood that the emergency rules were in place, going to be in place, and that the deadline and the language says if they have not applied by March 1st, they shall not be eligible for the 25%. And the same thing goes with the long-term homeowners. We've been dealing with that one for years, so that's not new to us. The only question that might be out there was the part about the residency. There was some confusion about if you owned a home and then sold it and moved into a new home. The assessors, even though it's not in rules yet, for both of those exemptions have been, to the best of my knowledge, applying the same logistics to both of those applications. In other words, what you guys passed at the session last year, the months that you lived in your old home gets added to the months that you live in your new home to be eligible for the exemption, even though that is not exactly how it was written in the law for January 1st of 26. To my knowledge, that's what the majority, I don't know of anybody that's not doing it. I'm not going to say that there isn't special circumstances out there, but to my knowledge, we're all doing the same thing.
Mrs. Huxtable, could they apply for those tax exemptions now for next year, today? Or is there a window?
Mr. Chairman, so I can't speak for the property tax relief program because that's totally separate and the treasurers could certainly address that. The 25% homeowners exemption, that is through the Department of Revenue website that they've set up a portal. And to my knowledge, that's not available till October 1st. So as soon as that portal becomes available, then they're eligible to go in and fill out that affidavit. The long-term homeowners, we do have those forms currently, and I think everybody, all the county assessors are working on the process within their offices of how to managing the change that you put into place that says they can call in. For the most part, we're still developing that process. We have a summer meeting in July where we'll try to get a standardized process for that. Starting with the 2027 tax year, I'm anticipating it'll be very similar to what we do for veterans, because currently for a veteran, they can call in to utilize their veterans exemption once they've qualified. And my interpretation was your intent to make the long-term homeowners the same. Of course, the People's Initiative may change all that as we move down the road, but we are working on processes to be uniform across the state so that people can start notifying us now that they want to use it on their long-term homeowners, bearing in mind that the People's Initiative could change that, because if they've applied for the long-term homeowners, they would not be eligible for the People's Initiative as you put in statute. So I think a lot of people are just holding off to find out what happens with the People's Initiative, to be honest. That's the discussions I've had at my counter. They want to see what's coming out of that People's Initiative so that they don't have to call and revoke an application and start over again. So.
Mr. Gill, can you come forward? Representative Riggins, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. Have you noticed any measurable increase in the property tax refund program? Generally speaking, I've always thought probably a lot more people qualify than ever apply. And I was just wondering if you'd noticed any growth in that application process across the state.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, that is a question I really can't answer. I need to defer that to my county treasurer, who is also here. Just by the reports he's given us, the numbers have increased. However, the dollar amounts have went down because obviously the property taxes have went down. So the ultimate dollars in that program have decreased, but I do believe there's more interest than ever before, but he could certainly answer that question better than I can.
Follow up.
Let's make sure this is working. Can property tax refund program be combined with any of the others? Just the 25% example. I didn't know if you could stack them.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, it's my understanding that yes, you can. The property tax relief program, where you get the actual check back, is based on a qualification method, and it's based on the taxes that were actually paid. So whatever your final tax bill after all the exemptions are applied is what they are looking at for the property tax relief program. But certainly Mr. Gill and my treasurer could answer that probably better.
Quick question, Mr. Gill. Well, we open this up on October 1st. How hard would it be to be available year round?
Mr. Chairman, it could be opened up year round. Obviously, that could happen. I think people would get confused on what tax year they're applying for. So the October 1st to March 1st is actually in our regular rules that are going through the system right now. So, and those have already been submitted, and they're open to 45 days of public comment.
I guess my point is, if I missed my 25 or 50% tax exemption because I didn't get it filled out, and I came in to talk to you, I think I'd know what tax year the next one would be and sign up right then and there. I don't know, but seems to be a clearer path.
Mr. Chairman, I understand your point very well. Obviously, we need to maintain our system. Sometimes there's programming updates that we need to do. And if we want it running, we want it running 24/7 and not down for any time. If you remember last year when we opened it, we did a soft opening in September of 2025, kind of a unadvertised opening, if you will, just to see what kind of traffic was coming through. We found some issues. Some social media posts shared the link to the site, but the link that was shared in the media was actually the Facebook post. So it actually took the user that was reading that newspaper or that online news article to a Facebook page, and then maybe they got to the actual website. That was corrected by the media once we found it very quickly. We also found some issues that we didn't know would happen. We didn't know that someone's name would be over 45 characters, and it was, so we had to expand those fields. And, you know, it was trust and things like that, you know, just long trust names. So there were some unanticipated issues that we ran into, but once it was opened and it went down maybe for 30 minutes, just for the programming on the name actually is why. So we were down for 30 minutes from October 1 through March 1st. So I think it's working very well, but obviously we're maintaining that system. My technical service group actually wrote the program, and so we would need time to make sure that that's maintained. So we kind of like the dates of October 1 through March 1st. It gives a nice window, you know, it's what, a 5-month window there for folks to apply for it or not apply, either way.
Ms. Huxtable.
Mr. Chairman, just one more comment. Ownership in Wyoming is as of January 1st, and that's the other piece of the puzzle. So depending on when they purchased their property, when the deed got conveyed and got recorded into the CAMA system, the RealWare system, is when they can find that parcel. So there is a time lag because not all counties update it very few, I think, actually updated on a day-to-day basis. It's usually sometime after abstracts, which is now, or sometime after tax roll, that you really can get in there and get all those deeds processed. So one of the frustrating parts for the taxpayer was I tried to do it, but I can't find my name. Well, you just bought it yesterday. It's not in the system yet. So there is a frustration for that, for them, and delaying it till October certainly gives us ample time to get all of the current stuff in the system so they can search for the name that they're wanting to, because if their name doesn't match what's in the system, it won't work for them, and it's just frustrating for everybody. So I just wanted to mention the ownership date. You know, we're looking at a January 1st lien date, so the closer that you can keep that sort of similar is less confusing for the taxpayer.
Mr. Chairman, I
Go ahead,
would,
Mr. Gill.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would add, Ms. Huxtable was absolutely correct. For the regular rules that have been promulgated by the department, we mirrored the language that you passed in the long-term homeowners where, you know, if they bought the house after January 1, those months of the previous tax year would count to the current tax year. We mimicked that language in the 25% exemption also. So it wasn't in the law, but we did mirror that language, and visiting with our AG representatives, they felt that the 25% was vague enough that we could probably mirror that language, so we did.
So if I'm understanding you, there's probably no way somebody can get the 50% and the 25%. We'll still tighten that language up, but the way we're processing it now, you can't get both, right?
Mr. Chairman, you cannot get the long-term homeowners and the 25%. That is correct currently. And we actually have built queries for the assessors to run to make sure that's not happening. Now, it's not always the case, though. There are properties where they're owned by a ranching corporation, let's say. And let's say one owner lives in one house, one owner lives in this house. Well, this owner's not 65. This owner is 65. So these folks might get the 50%, these folks get the 25%, even though it's the same parcel. So there are situations where that query doesn't work so well for the assessors, for sure. But right now, they can't get the 50 and the 25. That is cleaned up on the same property. Right now, they cannot get the 50% People's Initiative, should it pass, and the long-term homeowners. But currently, if the initiative should pass, they can also get the 25% if it's owner occupied.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to take back just a little bit because I want to understand a couple of things. And Ms. Huxtable and maybe Mr. Gill, you might know this best, but the notification process by each county. You'd mentioned that you're trying to bring some consistency to things, but my recollection of the initial process, and I might be putting words in your mouth, so please bear with me, but my recollection was that most counties kind of came up with their own approach for that notification. It was not necessarily pushed down consistently statewide. That's kind of my first question. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, Co-Chair, I guess I'm not sure which notification you're talking about. When we met last fall, we met with the County Treasurers Association, and to my knowledge, all county treasurers included on the tax bill for 2025 a notice about the exemptions that were in law at that time, as they were in law. So everybody was notified on their tax statement that came out a year ago in September of 25. To the best of my knowledge, the verbiage may have been a little bit different, but every county participated in that. After that, the meetings, the town halls, the private with senior citizens and all that, every county did do something a little bit different. But we did make sure that we had it on all the tax bills so that it was consistent across the state. Everybody that owned property in 25 got that notice that they needed to reach out by March 1st of 26. And did that statewide. The counties did that on their own. That was not required by law, but we did meet with the treasurers and their printers and our printers, and we worked with the department to get language correct. And so to the best of my knowledge, everybody did put it on there. Might not have been the exact same language, but or in the same place on your tax bill, but pretty consistent. Yes, sir.
Well,
Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. That was actually what I was trying to understand, because I know it was complicated for the assessors and treasurers. So I appreciate that. That's helpful. Now, what is your perception, or what is what is the plan moving forward? Because the notification piece of it is still kind of exists. Are they planning on doing that this year, or, moving forward, next year, moving forward? What is the general feel for the need to continue to do that? I guess I'm just concerned that we still have people who we need to notify, and I wasn't sure. I realize it's an extra burden, but I'm trying to understand what your thinking is on that.
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, Representative Locke. To the best of my knowledge, we plan to do it again for 26. We've not had those meetings. The assessors have their summer meeting in July, and I know it will be on the agenda to talk about it and try to firm something up with the County Treasurers Association as well. Also, all counties also put it on their notices of value. Again, it might have been a little different format, but those notices are required to be out by the fourth Monday in April, and everybody put a notice in there about the different exemptions as they are currently or have been passed in law, what to expect for 27. Of course, if the law changes, then that could add some confusion or clarity, whichever way the case goes. But we all did make a concerted effort to either do an insert, put it on the notice that went out in November of what exemptions are available, including the property tax relief, the veterans, all of the exemptions, and they're all printed on the notice when it came out. Worked with the Department of Revenue, reorganized that one sheet of paper that doesn't have a lot of real estate landscape in there, and got it all on there so that if you had applied for all of them by the time the notices went out, it was reflected on your notice of assessment. Also a reminder, if it wasn't on there, like your veterans, if you didn't have a veterans notice on there, then you might need to call us or the long-term homeowners by the fourth Monday in May. So everybody is doing something. Every county is making notice. Again, depending on the printer, it may be a little different because everybody contracts their printing or does it in-house a little different. So we are planning to do the same thing moving forward, just have to negotiate it with the treasurers because there is an expense. It was an additional cost for them to add that to their statements, and I don't think anybody got increases in budgets much for this upcoming season, so I'm not sure how that's going to fall out for the counties.
One other quick question on the tax bills, where you guys include the exemptions. Have we pretty much got the language on that cleaned up so it's understandable? Initially, it was kind of confusing.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we have. The department worked with the assessors. We have a uniform notice of value. It's not a tax bill, but the notice of value. We have a uniform that's statewide. Now the backside obviously is customized by all 23 counties, but the front is uniform statewide. The notice of value is only required to have the 4% cap on it. That is the only exemption that is required to be on there. But after discussions with the assessors, we felt that it would be more clear for the taxpayer and the property owner to actually see every exemption that they got. And I think we've made it very clear. I would defer to the assessors to see if there was confusion, and obviously we'll work on that for tax year 2027 if there is.
Mr. Chairman, yeah. It was very explicit on there what it was, but it's still confusing because they don't understand the same language that we do. And so most of the time when the taxpayer would come in with a question, they'd say, what does this bill say? And we'd walk through that from the beginning of this is what it was last year. This was the full market value of what your property was. And here's the exemptions that apply, including business personal property. Don't forget that one, because there was a choice for the assessors to mail out a zero balance notice or not mail those out. If the business personal property, the $75,000 exemption wiped out the account, there was no requirement to send them that notice. Now, some counties did. I'm one that did and got the phone call, why did I get something that shows zero? Well, this is why, because the first year I wanted you to see what that exemption did for you. After the first year, we may or may not, depending on the cost of doing that. But there was not just residential exemptions. There's pollution, there's fire suppression, there's business personal property. All of those are on there. They are kind of self-explanatory if you know the same language we know, but You know, you talked about assessed value versus taxable value versus market value. That all means something different to everybody, whether you're a realtor or a treasurer or an assessor. So we're happy to walk through those with the taxpayers when they come in. I'm certainly that there's many that still had questions. We did the best we could, and we're open to adjusting whatever we need to. But if it gets them into my office to visit with me, I'm happy about that, because then we get to talk about their property and make sure we have everything correct. So it's a good thing for the assessors to be able to visit with their constituents.
Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it fair to say that with all this confusion, we've actually increased the amount of participation with the people in your community and your office and that of the treasurer as well? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Worf, absolutely. Our traffic at our counters have exponentially increased. And sometimes that's a frustration if we're not geared up with staff to take care of that on a timely manner. So communication between us and the treasurer and the department when stuff went out in the mail is critical so that we can have staff ready to answer those questions. But it is always, we think it's a good thing as long as they're open to conversation. The ones that come in and slam stuff at us or throw things at us is not so much fun. But, and we do get those, but increasing the traffic absolutely did happen. Both in the grocery store and at my counter, I'll let you know.
Follow up.
Chairman. Yes, and I asked that for a specific reason. I've had a couple phone calls that I've received from my constituents, and I can tell you, I had one that used some very vulgar language and hung up on me, and I called that individual back and told him, I'll talk all day long, but I won't tolerate that. And so I would hope that they're being respectful, but I think this is good. I would like to see more people engaging. Maybe they'll pay more attention to what goes on down at the Capitol, because I do think that's what I see as being a good thing, is that we are communicating, and that's the biggest key. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Worf, absolutely, communication's key. Unfortunately, the next wave will be when the tax bills come out. Somebody did not look at their notice that came out in April, but when they get that tax bill and it either went up because they didn't hit the 25 or something else, that will be the next wave for us. And that's usually the ones where we hang up on them because we won't tolerate that language either in my office.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Gill. It may be for Director Fanning, but I continuously hear that we're tracking all of these exemptions for property tax. In 3915-105, we also have exemptions for sales and use tax, the personal property tax that we'll talk about after a while. Where are we tracking on those? And do we have the statutory authority that we gave you to continuously track the property taxes? Or is this just something we're keeping track of so that we understand what the revenue impacts have been?
Mr. Chairman, I will defer to the Director Fanning. You wouldn't like me to speak to sales tax?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, Brett Fanning, Director of the Wyoming Department of Revenue. Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, this is something I've attempted to do for years. The reason why tracking sales and use tax exemptions is so difficult is twofold. The first one is when our vendors report to us, they just report one exempted amount. And so that's a challenge when you're trying to track sales and use tax returns. The second complication is related to a lot of our sales and use tax exemptions are on the purchase side of a transaction. And not everyone has to register or license with the department for us to track it. And Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, I use a good example here. Yesterday, just me, myself, I purchased some fuel, which is sales tax exempt. I purchased a candy bar at the store, which is sales tax exempt. I purchased something online from an online retailer where it was shipped to me. The shipping charge was exempt. So me, myself, took advantage. Oh, I also got a hard copy newspaper as well, which is also sales tax exempt. So trying to track these from the purchase side without having some sort of reporting requirement from the purchaser is what makes that difficult. You may recall 2 or 3 years ago, I do believe I was asked this exact same question. They said, get us in the ballpark. And so what I did in front of this committee, I believe it was in Sheridan maybe a few years ago, was compile all of the reported exempted amounts that I found on our sales and use tax returns. And that was a very big figure. And then I had a bunch of caveats on what I just explained. So I can get you a big general figure, but categorizing it is where the difficulty lies.
Co-Chairman Locke.
I wanted to also go back to the owner occupied registering for that. And the long-term homeowner registration as well. And I wanted to ask Ms. Huxtable and the department. Currently it's obviously a little different. Now, both have the owner occupied requirement, but it's obviously a little bit different registry. But it's also, we're handling them different. And I guess this is the question I have for you. Are there some changes we need to consider on bringing them as close as we can? Because I know we added that language to try to simplify. I later thought about that, did we make it harder? I just guess I'd like to have some feedback from you guys on, is it consistent where it needs to be and different where it needs to be? Or are there some changes we could make to make it as consistent, more consistent? Let me ask that question that way. I'm sorry, long question, but your help would be appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, from the department standpoint, when we were looking at both exemptions, obviously we designed the very first application for the long-term homeowners and then the follow-up application for the next year. And then, of course, in this last session, you passed it the language is very similar to the veterans exemption, where that qualifying owner can call or send a smoke signal or fax or email, something like that, to inform the county assessor that they still qualify for that. The homeowners exemption, and I think probably I would defer to the assessors on that, we're talking about a larger population that would qualify for it. And in my personal opinion, being a former assessor, I don't know that these offices are set up to have 20 to 30,000 people walk through the door. The long-term homeowners, as you heard earlier, we had about 38,000 that applied for it statewide. Some counties were close to 6,000 folks that actually walked in their office. 2 counties were almost 6,000, but the majority were right around anywhere between 1,200 to 2,000. So, and obviously economy of scale, right? So you have a small county with an office of 3. Well, that 200 folks that walk in for that long-term homeowners is pretty equivalent to the office that has 21 folks and gets 6,000. So, but I would defer to the assessors on that of how they handle it. Is it the same notification? It is not. Currently, the homeowners exemption, the 25%, you apply for it online on a department supplied website. And then the assessor has the ability to go there daily and look at those, maybe review them, make sure that it wasn't some bot or, some kid fooling around with the website or something like that. So they have the opportunity to review those on a daily basis. And then at the end, once the deadline is passed, they can download that file. And we have a way of bringing that file right directly into the CAMA system and apply it to those properties that are affected by the 25%. So it isn't consistent. You are correct, Mr. Co-Chair. It isn't consistent, but I think just the sheer numbers, I think it's working pretty well, but I'm going to defer to the assessors for sure.
Mr. Co-Chair, I don't know exactly how to make it exactly the same for both of those exemptions without the intent of the legislature knowing what that is. There is a residency requirement. And so we don't know from year to year which resident moves and which one does not. So by them going online for the affidavit to say that they live in that home for 8 months out of the year, it is an taxpayer self-reporting. We don't have a very good way of verifying that they really live in that home. But that's also true of the long-term homeowners. The only difference with the long-term homeowners is they have to give us 25 years worth of residency addresses where they've paid taxes. And that's something that can be reviewed. It's difficult to review in some cases because there's just a sheer number of the volume. It's just difficult when you get those at the last minute. What I can say is matching those dates, I think, will be very helpful. When we had people come in for the long-term homeowners and they didn't qualify for whatever reason, age, 25 years, whatever, we could have deferred them to the 25% homeowners because they met the 8-month requirement, but they didn't meet the other. But it was passed. We couldn't do anything about that. But moving forward, we can. So I think that will be a help for the taxpayer that maybe missed the 25% because they thought maybe they got the 50, but they didn't quite qualify because they hadn't been here for 25 years. As far as allowing them to call in, like we're going to allow that for the long-term homeowners starting with 2027, if you're all good with that, with the 25%, we can work with the department to administer that. That once they're registered in the system, they're good until the property changes ownership name. That is an option. That doesn't tell you whether they bought a second house and moved out for 5 months out of the year. You guys have to decide if that's the policy you want, and then we'll do our best to administer it. Certainly allowing them to qualify one time and then reach out to us just to renew it on an annual basis is a little easier step like we do the veterans. But if the intent is you want to make sure they live in that house 8 months out of the year, that's a little bit different story when you're talking the sheer volume on the 25%. The homeowners, the long-term homeowners is something that most of us can manage because it's a smaller number. It is growing. Converse County, I anticipated 3,500 to 4,000 homeowners should be able to apply for the 25%. I got 1,170. But I also increased 150 in the long-term homeowners. So some of those people actually moved over and some of them applied for both. And thank goodness for the department that wrote the query for me to find them because I would not have found them otherwise. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of steps. You tell us your intent and we'll do our best to administer it. If it's just an honest self-reporting and the taxpayer says, yep, I lived there 8 months out of the year and I always will from now on, and that's good enough, we can administer that. I can tell you that not all of them are maybe, don't want to say honest, but honest about that because we've had them at the counter that we know that maybe they're not being completely truthful with us, but we don't have a way to verify that. So you guys decide your intent and we'll administer it as best we can, and certainly making them the same would be helpful for the taxpayer.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. That's helpful. One thing I would ask of both Ms. Huxtable and I know the group of assessors across the state, which is a great group of folks, and the department, as we move forward in this interim, if there are some better date matching issues, I think it's at least harder for me to see and understand all those. So as those things come up or procedural changes that you think the body needs to make, I would personally appreciate any additional feedback you can give us on that to where we can make it better. We're obviously trying to make it as easy for the taxpayers as we can, but at the same time, we're not trying to crush the assessor system behind there. So any thoughts you do have, I think would be appreciated, because this is one of those things we're at least trying to clean that up. And I know we'll talk later today on, I think today I might be lost on that, but later today on the initiative as well. But we're just trying to find where can we bring some consistency, make it easier on you, at the same time making it so it's not hard for taxpayers to do that thing. So any thoughts you have are appreciated.
Thank you. And as I stated earlier, the assessors will have their annual summer meeting in July, and that will be on the agenda to take notes for anything to bring back to your next meeting of suggestions.
And Mr. Chairman, the department stands ready to work with the assessors and the committee to do that.
Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gill steered into a question I have for Ms. Huxtable. So for the last couple of years, so have you generally across the state, have the assessor's office had the ability or need to increase staffing as this stuff, all these calculations and stuff have come along?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, I can't speak statewide. Administrator Gill can probably do that because he's talked to all 23 counties. But just speaking to the assessors informally, yes. It's been a tax load, a big taxing load on their staff, both emotionally and physically resource-wise. You've had to pull people in from the field that normally would have been doing regular field work to sit in to answer the phone and do data entry to stay on time. I think you've also seen, we could probably get the reports of overtime. For the first time, we've had overtime probably more than ever before in the assessor's office, not because they got stuck out in the field in a rainstorm, but because they had to come in on a weekend to process the last batch of exemptions that came in so they could get them in on time. So yes, there has been a heavy load to most of the assessor's office. We've tried to deal with it. There's been so many changes. We've just done the best we can. And again, if it stays sort of status quo for the next year, we have a better handle on what we need for staff to go to our commissioners for budgets. Once the initial push is through, can we streamline it ourselves? We hope so. Make things a little easier for the taxpayer. I know tax assessors have traveled out into the public, actually done exemptions in the field. I think the Laramie County assessor here, and he went to some community fairs just to get people to do that. And that's certainly, if he took staff with him, that's an extra paycheck for those people. So it has put in a little bit more workload, which we're happy to do for the moment. Continuing on, we might have to have some adjustments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having us in your fair city. I've kind of got maybe a big picture question for everybody at the table. And it's really in terms of how prepared we are going forward, and do the people understand what they'll be voting for in November? And do they understand whether there's implications with previous bills that we passed or previous applications they've done? And are we doing a fair job of telling the people what the implications are for what they would be voting on? Either their personal implications or the implications for tax receipts across the state. And I know the Secretary of State's been working on the ballot language. It's not clear to me where that is. But with this question, we've got all these pieces that it doesn't feel real smooth right now. To me, and then we're coming into an election where people are going to have a major decision to make. And are we setting up to be fair to inform them both the positive and the negative implications of that decision? And Ms. Huxtable and the rest of the assessors talk to people every day about this. And I think the department might have more of the technical analysis of the what ifs of this whole big question. Can you help me? Are we creating a wreck? Is this going to go easy peasy? Help me.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, easy peasy. I don't think that's in my realm of dictionary words right now. Are we possibly creating a wreck? Potentially. From the conversations I've had at my counter and my colleagues have had at their counters, people are very confused about what they've got already and what that initiative means. And to be honest, until I truly see all the language from the Secretary of State of how it's going to go on the ballot, I'm not sure. We don't know how it's going to affect the 25%. We do know that you won't be able to get the long-term homeowners and the People's Initiative because you put that in law last year. So we can explain that to the taxpayers now. For my county, that's a pretty easy explain. The People's Initiative is 50% of your house. The 50% long-term that you're enjoying right now is 50% of the land and the house. However, the requirements, the residency requirements vary very differently. As I understand it, the People's Initiative is a 6-month residency in your home, but you only have to live in Wyoming for 1 year, if I'm reading the language that I've seen so far. Currently, there's no Wyoming, you know, currently for the long-term homeowners, there really wasn't a residency. You just had to pay property taxes, residential property taxes in Wyoming for 25 years. You may or may not claim to Wyoming as your residence, but you paid Wyoming residence tax because you had vacant land. So there is so many moving parts. To explain it to a taxpayer, you almost have to get that taxpayer off by themselves, not for lack of transparency, but because their situation is so different than the one standing next to them that maybe did qualify or didn't qualify. And until we actually see the language and understand the People's Initiative and how it's going to be implemented, it is hard for us to explain to them what this means. What I can tell them, every property tax relief program that's in place now and in the future impacts your services that you're getting from a local taxing entity in some manner. I can't say to what degree because I'm not on those boards, but every one of them feels an impact a little bit differently, whether it's somebody that relies 100% on property tax or very little, it does impact them. So every one of these exemptions does have an impact, and I strongly urge them to go to that taxing entity's budget hearing. Go talk to them, go find out what is this impact going to be. Every county is different. Converse County relies heavily on minerals. Teton County, not so much. And so when you have these kind of exemptions, what does it hurt your local service as far as your ambulance? Is it possible that you could get an ambulance call? I could get one for my 95-year-old father that I had to do a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to get a bill for that. Not a Medicare bill, but a bill. And those are all impacted by these exemptions. And they're very hard to explain to the taxpayer. And I don't have a good way, but when you come up with one, Senator Case, please share with me and I'll be happy to use it.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up a little bit? And maybe with the Department of Revenue as well. So when we propose a bill and there's enough time, we get a fiscal note on the bill. You know, that's our requirements. The People's Initiative, as far as I'm aware, there isn't a fiscal note process per se. But I think maybe the Department of Revenue probably has that exact number right in their pocket right now. But no, I mean, when we vote on a bill, we can look and say, well, this is what the impacts are. Do the people have the same way? So far, they don't seem to.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, back in 2023, the People's Initiative came to the Department of Revenue to get a fiscal impact, and that is part of an initiative process. From my understanding, they must ask for a fiscal impact on their initiative. They came to us. Obviously, we used at that time the best data we had, which was 2022 data. So that impact at that time for the 50% on the dwelling only for owner-occupied properties statewide was about 137 million statewide. Then in the last session, you may remember, and I think LSO may have had it in their packet today, there is a fiscal note that was put together by both the department and Mr. Sackett for the People's Initiative, should it pass, along with what was in current law. So at the time, the 50% for the long-term homeowners was going away after tax year 2026, right? Now we know it's been extended, but the very initial long-term homeowners, it only was for the first 2 tax years, 25 and 26. The 25% is in perpetuity. So the impact that we put together with LSO was around 124 million impact of the People's Initiative with current law in place. And I believe it may be in your packet for the discussion on the People's Initiative today.
And Mr. Chairman, I did see that, but it's not really granular, is it? People don't know how it affects them when they vote.
Mr. Chairman, just to repeat what Ms. Huxtable said, absolutely. Folks don't know how it's impacting their little fire district that, they live in the county maybe and they have a fire district. They don't know how it's affecting that fire district. In the county I'm from, some of the fire districts rely on oil. They rely on minerals, and less on property tax. But there are some fire districts in the county I come from that 100% rely on residential property tax because that's pretty much what's in their district. So yeah, it's not down to the granular level. I wish there was a way, Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, that we could do that we could show that impact to that individual taxpayer. This is how this will affect your library. This was how this will affect FFA or the county fair. This is how it will affect your fire district. And we just don't have that at the taxpayer level.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gill, thank you for that. Would you agree that individuals have the opportunity to go to their treasurer's office and ask for a printout of how their taxes are spent?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, I'd absolutely agree with that.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you also agree, Mr. Gill, that there's not really a granular level that we could get to because the local budgets that determine who's receiving how much of the money that the county or the city or the town receive, they can reallocate that money at any time when they receive the payments and they know what their total budget expenditures are, leaving thus local control ultimately at the helm of property taxes?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, I'm not a budget expert by any means on that. Coming from a county, obviously there's a lot different revenue streams that come in. We have sales tax, we have fees, we have property tax. At the granular level to the taxpayer, yeah, without attending those budget meetings and knowing exactly where those revenue streams and those expenses are, yeah, we can't get it down to the taxpayer very well.
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'll ask this to Mr. Gill. So just trying to go back on the ballot initiative and getting a handle on the fiscal note, it's still confusing that the original 2023, based on 2022 numbers, had, I think, 142 million for fiscal year 2027. And then we ended up with this 124 million figured out last year. But the Secretary of State's note has, it indicates for fiscal year 2028, 92.6 million, which seems considerably less. So just trying to figure out what the actual cost of the ballot initiative overall is still quite confusing. I wonder if you could help us understand that better. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, yeah, we saw those numbers, and Brett actually clipped it out of the newspaper. It's been advertised in our local newspaper. It says there that this is an estimate of the fiscal impact to the state of Wyoming only and does not include an estimate of any impact upon political subdivisions. So I have not discussed it with the Secretary of State. I don't know if they were just including the school foundation, the 25 and the 6 school mills. I have not spoken with them. In fact, we were not part of the language that for the ballot. So, and in fact, the only conversation we've had with the Secretary was originally in 2023.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so that makes me think that those numbers are not accurate. Obviously, if we have a 50% property tax cut, we know the impacts we've already seen to counties and local subdivisions, as well as the school foundation. So I guess we don't we didn't ask the Secretary of State to be here today. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, we did not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up.
Follow up.
Thank you. I might suggest maybe we should have some conversations with the Secretary of State so we could get closer to an actual number and understand and make sure that the public understands what the fiscal impact is. I want to go back to the 25%, just looking at the figures, the draft figures you provided, Mr. Gill. Thank you very much. So very interesting. I think the public should understand that on the 25% exemption between 2025 and 2026, the total assessed valuation went down over $1 billion. That seems to represent a 68% reduction in that, and also somewhat coincidentally about $68 million, give or take. I'm curious how many, if you guys have a sense of how many homeowners that it obviously applied automatically in 2025 and people had to apply in 26. I'm just curious what that number of people or homeowners, I should say, what that represents, the reduction. Do you have a sense of that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, just to be clear, the folks that actually received the exemption, is that the amount you're looking for?
Mr.
Follow
Chairman.
up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm asking the number of people that did not apply or no longer getting that exemption.
Mr. Chairman, great question. So in our analysis, using economic analysis division statistics on countywide owner-occupied properties, it obviously varies by county a lot. You know, in Albany County, 50% of the homeowners are actually owner-occupied properties, whereas statewide, it's around 72%. So if we took 72% of the 1.4 billion from 2025 that it was exempted, and I'm speaking in assessed value, we take 72% of that, that leaves you with around $1 billion, just a little over. And then you look at the number that we actually exempted, or we're estimating was exempted in 2026, it's about 45% of eligible property owners received the 25% exemption.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just ask about on the ballot initiative, then, so we know that local, we can kind of look at the 25% and try to estimate what the 50% would be. So we know that will impact local communities. We also know it's going to impact revenues for the schools. Is there a plan to make that up, and how would we make that up, or where would constitutionally we be required to find those funds to make that up?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, I don't have a good answer for that, of where the replacement or lack of a better term, backfill would come from. I think that would be a policy decision of this body.
Senator Ide.
Just a real quick comment on that discussion. We need to learn how to maybe, instead of backfill or find other revenues, to learn how to spend less. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Gill, I think you probably have this number roughly, but my recollection, and I know this is very diverse across the for every county, but my recollection was that land is in the, 17 to 20%. So of the property tax bill, I'm probably off by several percent, but my point is, you've got a rough estimate, probably even county by county, of what that is. So when you look at the 50%, it's not 50%, apples to apples with the 25%. This is just me thinking out loud. It's closer to 33%, just conceptually. Can you walk us through that a little bit and just give me a feel for that? Because these are numbers I've heard and I'm sort of piecemealing them here, but if you can help me with that, because that's one of the things I want to be clear. The 50% People's Initiative is not 50% apples to apples with the 25% and with the long-term homeowner. It's a different animal when you consider the fact that land is not included. And so I'd like to understand that, because at some level, although you really can't do it bulk for the state, you kind of have to go county by county, I'm sure. But if you can walk us through that a little bit, just to make that clear.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we're working on those numbers now, actually. And you're right, they are different animals. Off the top, just cocktail napkin math, the 25% will be very, very similar to the 50% People's Initiative when you look at the numbers together. In fact, the 25% might actually be more in some cases. Your 17 to 20% land value, yeah, I mean, in appraisal, typically you're right, but in certain counties, Representative Storrs County for sure, that land is much more valuable than 20%. So we're working on those numbers actually right now, Mr. Co-Chairman, to see what that difference is between the 25 and the 50% People's Initiative. I think we can easily do that with the long-term homeowners and the 50%. But of course, more people will be eligible for the 50% People's Initiative than they will be for the long-term homeowners, because the long-term homeowners has side rails on it that you have to be 65 or older, and you have to have paid residential property taxes for 25 years or more in Wyoming. So not a real good comparison, the People's Initiative and the long-term homeowners. But I think we can do a comparison with the 25 and the 50 because they are very similar. Ms. Huxtable brought up some differences. The difference being the length of residency per year is 6 months in the People's Initiative, 8 months in the 25%. So there is a difference there. So we'll need to adjust for that. I think we can use EAD numbers and come up with a pretty good estimate for that. I will say the People's Initiative also has another striking difference. They have to apply by the 4th Monday in May. So that might be a consideration for the body should it pass, to maybe uniform that date up with the 25% and the long-term homeowners now change of March 1st. And you only have to be a resident for 1 year in Wyoming to receive the People's Initiative. So they are a little different for sure, but I think we'll be able to do some analysis and maybe for next meeting have that for you between the 25 and the People's Initiative.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, but I think I'm not too far off in saying, instead of it being a 25 and 50 with because I'm with you, I'm doing this on the homeowner 25%. And I know there's some other nuance, but it's fairly minor. But we tend to want to say it's 25 and it's 50, but it's probably closer, if you're doing a comparison, it's probably closer to a 25 and a 30-something%-ish. Is that fairly accurate?
Mr. Chairman, that very well could be accurate. Keeping in mind, the People's Initiative does not have the land. So yeah, absolutely. And 50% of the dwelling. So it will be a cut of 50% of the dwelling only, and not affecting the land. Now, should the body change that, if the initiative passes in next session, that could really change those numbers for sure.
Thank you.
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trying to figure out what these will cost altogether is really challenging. So I appreciate Mr. Gill's effort to help inform us. Just using kind of back of the envelope, looking at the 139 million estimated for this year from the current exemptions, much less what the 50% would be. And then just thinking about what those cuts, given that 70% of our property tax goes to schools. I actually just want to pose a question to Senator Ide. I appreciate your fiscal conservativeness, but I also am just really kind of wondering if we're looking at 180 million, let's just say conservatively, cuts to the school foundation program. Are you suggesting that we we just not spend that money?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, that's a fair question, I guess. But maybe you could answer the question of why we spend 100% more per pupil for education than our neighbors to the west of us. That's a question for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not, I don't sit on the education committee, but I do know that our small schools cost a lot and our transportation costs a lot. And I know certainly in my community, paying teachers costs a lot because our housing is so expensive. So, we've looked at what those issues are through the recalibration process. And I think we realize that we still support having a great education system in the state. And it does cost a lot in a place like Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of stress in education right now. People are kind of upset by the implications of the funding model that we're just beginning to find out. And I know that you're hearing it in your communities. I'm hearing it in my community. There have been members talking about maybe we need a special session regarding education funding. So that kind of sets us up here because we have a proposal where we're going to run off the cliff and cut the funds, but we had money last year. We didn't quite get it right. We disagree about how it should have been. And as we look at the implications, we're going to have to make some adjustments. But I don't see anybody saying we should cut to Idaho levels or we should cut to Utah levels in education. So we're going to have to find money for education. And there will be lawsuits about that. Where will that come from? Local governments are going to have to find money. They need to know the implications of these so they can plan. And we're not doing a very good job of helping them to plan.
Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question more related to the Citizens Initiative and how it specifies the residential property that we created the special class for, subclass for. So but it's specific to owner occupied, correct? I think that's what it is. So is that at some point going to be a conflict because we didn't create a classification of owner occupied residential properties? Would I ever be able to make the case that you can't tax me differently? You have to give me the same break because of the constitutional phrase. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Riggins, great question, great point. We currently have that, right? We have a 50% exemption on owner-occupied residential property, 65 or older, 25 years paying residential property tax. We have a 25% exemption for owner-occupied property and the associated land as long as they live there 8 months a year. So we currently have that. Now, the legislature with Amendment A does have that ability, right? We're a tier taxation state in Wyoming. Since 1988, we're tier taxation. Minerals at 100%, industrial at 11.5%, all other property at 9.5% currently, and residential property at 9.5% currently. But Amendment A allowed this body to carve out a sub-tier, which we had never had before. That sub-tier would be owner-occupied. So when you look at the 25% exemption and being owner-occupied, was the legislative body looking at the vote of Amendment A saying, okay, the voters want us to treat owner-occupied property differently than non-owner-occupied property? Question for you, I wouldn't put words in your mouth, of course, but we currently already have that. So I think the legislature has the ability constitutionally to set exemptions. They absolutely do. So a veteran's exemption is treating a person that wasn't a veteran differently, right? I mean, we already have that in law. So I don't think that would be a problem with the People's Initiative. But again, this body does have that ability to carve out that sub-tier of residential property to a different rate than regular residential property. Now, keep in mind, the legislature has always had the ability to change that tier taxation and the amount and that percentage. But the Constitution keeps us within a certain limit. Industrial property cannot be 40% higher than all other property, nor, so it has two pieces, nor can it not be 4 percentage points higher. So it has to meet those two qualifications, right? So right now, industrial is not 40% higher than the all other class or the residential class. It is, I want to say like 28% higher. Quick math in my head. If you wanted the industrial to actually be at that 40%, I think you would have to take the industrial rate up to 13.2, I think it is, or something like that. Of course, you could always change that industrial tier to another level, not 11.5. Let's say you change it to 10.5, then you would have the ability for the residential property to be lower and then the sub tier to be lower than that. So you have constitutional guidelines there and sideboards, but they've never been used since 1988 when the voters of Wyoming voted in a tier taxation system in Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. Ms. Huxtable? Thank you. I think at this point in time, Mr. Fanning, we'll go ahead and take about a 10-minute break and be back at 10:30. Welcome to the Revenue Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is Joel Shell. I'm the treasurer in Converse County. I appreciate the opportunity to address some of the issues that have been brought up regarding treasurers, the tax relief program, as well as the tax bills. First of all, to answer Representative Riggins' question about the number that we've seen in tax refund programs. Of course, the legislature spent a couple of years increasing that program, raising the limits to expand it so we would get more people. So from 23 to 24, we saw significant increases in that program. I could talk to the numbers we've seen in Converse County, where we went from about 200 applicants to a high last year, about 515, based on the idea that more people could reach the income limits and qualify. This year, it's been down a little bit. So for the 25 program that we've been administering now, we hit about 400 people when the program closed last Monday. And a lot of that is because of what Assessor Huxtable talked about earlier with the confusion in the program. So we saw with people where we sent them forms. We're still, I think, one of the counties that's doing the local county program as well as the state program for the tax refunds. And what a lot of the taxpayers said is that I received these forms in the mail, but I already filled this out. I filled this out in the assessor's office in February. And so we were trying to explain to them that what you had filled out was actually the exemption program for the long-term homeowners maybe, and not the refund program. A lot of people came in asking about refunds when they meant exemptions, and a lot of people came in talking about the exemptions when they meant refunds. Some of the issues there were just the timelines. So the long-term homeowner program closed the third Monday in May. So as the assessors, and then we are also putting out that information saying, hey, you need to apply for this by that third Monday in May. Then the state refund program closed the first Monday in June. So we are also putting that information out. So a lot of people got that confused. They thought if they missed the third Monday in May, they could no longer apply for a refund. Or if we said you have until the first Monday in June to apply for the refund, they thought they had until then to apply for the long-term homeowners. So there was a lot of confusion there because those timelines were close enough together that we're all putting that information out, trying to reach taxpayers to get in before the last day. There's a lot of confusion to them as to which program we're referring to. And it's a lot of it's the semantics that we're using. The difference between a refund and an exemption is just not really, on the top of people's minds as far as what the implications of that are. We heard that the forms were too close together, that they looked too much the same. I don't know if you filled out the long-term homeowner versus the refund program. I don't know how similar they are, but at least on the top or the front page, they thought when they saw those forms come in the mail that was a form that they had already seen and that they already filled out. We see a lot of confusion with people, especially those that have their taxes in escrow. A lot of them don't ever open their tax bills because their mortgage companies pay it. And what we're seeing right now is that we're kind of getting notifications in waves of people, even finding out that their taxes have gone down based on when their mortgage companies are doing their escrow analysis, right? So a lot of those were done in the first of the year. So in January, their analysis was done and they got notified by their mortgage company that they had an excess in their escrow and that they were going to go refund back or lower their payments. And they called us wanting to know what that was about. But we have a lot of people where their escrow analysis is not done until the anniversary of their loan. And those are coming out throughout the year, right? So we have some people who have not yet seen that analysis done to tell them that they have excess amount in their escrow. And some of those people are not even aware they got the 25% discount, right? Because they haven't seen it yet in their escrow, which is really what they track rather than looking at their tax bills each year. So there's a lot still confusion there. In regards to the tax bill notifications, yes, as Assessor Huxtable said, all 23 county treasurers did put notifications in their bills indicating that people had to take action to keep those exemptions. Some of them were on the front of the bill, some were on the back of the bill, some did inserts. Our strategy in Converse County was we went from an 8.5 by 11 to an 8.5 by 14. We had payment coupons at the bottom, and then below those coupons, we put the information that was standardized that we received from the Assessors Association as to what they needed to do to keep the exemption. So the idea there would be if they were paying the bill and using the coupons, they would have to go past this informational part or at least tear that off in hopes that they would see it. We might have been better off putting a picture of a cat on it or something else that would grab their attention. But as Assessor Huxtable said, we know we missed a lot of those people. We know we had thousands of people that did not apply for one reason or the other. The treasurers continue to work with the assessors, and we certainly are pledged to continue that in the future. So as that language changes or we need to make more notifications to people, we'll continue to do that in the tax bills or any way we can do that. I think it is notable as well for the committee when it comes to the exemptions that are listed on the tax bill and what people are seeing them, how are we notifying them that they got this exemption once they get their bill? The majority of the counties use a system that is not capable of itemizing those currently. So even though they got a 4% cap and they got the 25% exemption, they just see an aggregated number that says, here's your tax bill, here's your amount of the tax. And right now, the language on most of those bills says includes a savings of X dollars for exemptions, but it doesn't indicate which type of exemption. So we're working with our vendor to try to get that expanded in the future. Right now, they just have one field. And so even though those are coming from the Department of Revenue with different codes telling us what type of exemption that is, they're just aggregated onto one bill, onto one number in the bill. So that's something I think we could work on in the future to try to get more transparency so people understand which part is the cap, what part is a homeowner's exemption. That we currently do break out the veteran exemption, but that's the only other one that's actually broken out. And unless there are other questions, or I would stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Treasurer, for being here. And I want to tell you guys do a bang up job in Converse County. I just want to commend you. What would be your recommendation as how to deal with these mortgages, the folks that don't understand that they've received a reduction? What would be the best way going forward to deal with those folks, sir? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Campbell, I think it's what we've been, doing now or continuing to do is just trying to use all the public channels that we have to notify people. We still have people tell us they're not aware of this tax refund program, right? Which has been going on at least for 15 years, off and on, funded by the legislature. So we still have people, it's so hard. We do Facebook posts, social media posts. We have a lot of people that are not on social media. We don't promote those. I think even having a consistent message or knowing who is responsible to put that message out, right? I think that's another thing. We look at it, a program comes out and we say, okay, the treasurers are going to help intake the refund forms. We see a press release go out maybe from the governor's office, press release from the state. We all use different language. We even use different language telling people, how they need to apply, right? You need to put in your account number, which is different than your state ID or your parcel ID or your county ID or your local assessment number, which all can mean the same things in different counties. So I think standardizing the message and then making it clear who's supposed to put that message out, whether, we're supposed to be doing that at the county level, whether it's going to happen at the state level, and a coordination of that message would really help us, I think, decrease some of the confusion. But as you heard earlier, it's just the number of changes that we've made to the system has really made it difficult for taxpayers, even those that are trying to stay informed, to understand what they're supposed to apply for at what time and what it means to them. It's confusing, right? Like they're applying for the exemption for the 26 tax, but they're applying for a refund for the 25 tax. They're doing it at the same time. So they apply for an exemption. They think it affects the bill that they just got, but it's not. It's going to affect the bill they're going to get, where the refund comes from the payment they just made. So, for anybody, that's a difficult lift to try to understand exactly the timing of what you're doing when.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick, but I think we had mentioned it to the department and to Ms. Huxtable certainly, but as we go, just where we can bring consistency, timing, consistency and all of that, as we go through the interim, I think those would be questions that this body would definitely like to hear ideas on that as you go. I'm not asking for specifics now, but I'd love the larger group to be thinking about those kinds of things to make sure we do the right thing. We move bills forward that tidy things up, make it easy on our taxpayers, but certainly make it easy on your organizations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is it possible to make one deadline for all of it? Or is it tiered and too much work to do it all at once?
Mr. Chairman, I can say as somebody that doesn't have to do the assessor's job, sure. right? I mean, from my standpoint, set a date, we'll set that date. I mean, probably not is my guess because of the process, right? Because of the process of assessment and how it aligns with the different tax years and what people are certifying. They're having to certify at a certain time. Like for us in the tax refund program, they're certifying what their assets were and whether they lived in the home for last year. At the same time, they're going in for their exemptions and certifying what they're doing for the next upcoming year. So to set one deadline, I think there's some of them that are close enough together now that it seems like we could align them. But I'm certainly not an expert in the assessment process, and it's the timelines of those assessments as far as when they have to be mailed, when they have to be received. And we have the same thing with tax bills. When do the tax bills have to be mailed? When are they due? That it makes it difficult to do that. I'd certainly love to see an assessment of that and maybe seeing a way we could clean some of those up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ready to go, Josh? Excuse me, Mr. Anderson?
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson, LSO. So this next section is on property tax reform. So early this morning, we kind of talked about some of the relief measures that have already been enacted, as well as some potential changes that were considered last year. And then these next few bills were some bills that were considered by the legislature last year that took some additional steps related to maybe changing the property tax system specific to residential property. So the first one on the list, residential property tax replacement. This was a bill, House Bill 118, sponsored by the committee last year. And I can just kind of quickly walk through these bills, and then Mr. Sackett has some additional fiscal information on these, and then we can take any questions. So this bill, Mr. Chairman, you can see on page 2, it puts in residential real property as a separate class, but then set that rate of assessment at 0%. And also, of course, made the definition of residential property similar to the previous bill we discussed this morning. On page 4, the bill would add a 2% sales tax in addition to the current 4% state tax, taking that up to 6%. It would have an exception that additional 2% would not apply to sales to industrial facilities that are subject to Industrial Siting Council during the period of permitting and construction of that industrial facility. Then the bill provides for the distribution of that 2% on page 5, the 2% sales tax. It puts that into a separate account invested with the state treasurer, and then it's distributed to each county based on the amount that the county lost as a result of that 9.5% or reduction from 9.5% for residential property down to 0. It does exclude amounts that would have been exempt under the current exemptions, so the 4%, the long-term homeowner exemption, and the 25%. To come up with that amount, then they apply their mills to that to determine the amount that their property tax distributions were reduced, and that gets distributed out to each county. If there's not enough in the account, it gets reduced proportionally by each county based on the total amount available. If there is any excess in that account, it's kept separate. And then there's a requirement for the legislature to review that and consider using that for direct distributions. On bottom of page 7 over to page 8, it makes the same changes for use tax. Of course, with the passage of the bill last year, that section would no longer be included as we combined the sales and use tax provisions. And then page 9 in section 2, it was conditional on a constitutional amendment, Senate Joint Resolution 3, that would just have also set that rate of residential property at 0%. So that was that bill, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ide.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Sack. I'm not sure who this question's for, but could you remind the body here, the committee, what that 2% sales tax, the revenue that it brought in just purely on residential, whoops. And that number was on primary residential homeowner property, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, in my memo, more of the meat of the memo probably, there is question 3 and question 4. Those both revolve around a real estate transfer tax, which is kind of later. We can chat now about that. And then a 2% sales and use tax increase. The 2% sales and use is across the board on all sales transactions. So if you buy whatever, it's an additional 2% onto the 4%. So you'd be paying a base 6% sales and use tax on all goods purchases, minus the exemptions, whatnot. But then and that was about last year, that was a $488 million increase. So about 244 million per 1%. Also part of this discussion that we had is here on question 3, which was the real estate transfer tax, which would be assessed on all valid home sales, in the state. And there's a number of tables that outline that, table 1, 2, and 3 in my memo. Bottom line, and we can talk more about that later, but 2% real estate transfer tax in 2025 would have raised about $92.8 million. So combined, I wrote it down here somewhere, a 2% sales and use tax across the board and a 2% real estate transfer tax was around $580 million. There is a fair bit of volatility in a real estate transfer tax. If you look at table 3 of that memo, there's a low of around 69 million and a high of around 104 million, 104.5 million. So that was an average of 86, but of course, interest rates, we've seen a reduction in the number of home sales the last numbers of years, which are in table 2, provides the number of valid home sales by county for the last 5-6 years. You can see we had a high of 12,500 home sales in 2021, but that's dropped down to about 7,600, 7,700 the last few years. So there's quite a bit of volatility in the, number of home sales, which definitely impacted, by residential mortgage rates and stuff, which have been pretty high in the last few years. So about 580 million is that estimate for 2% real estate transfer tax and a 2% sales and use tax.
Follow
up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I posed that question a little backwards there. I got a little ahead of myself because you did the transfer tax on the residential, but yeah, thank you for that. It was about
490 million.
490 and then 92 for the transfer tax to get us to 580. And to follow that up, what was the, if we went to 0 on residential property taxes, what number are we losing there, so to speak? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, good question. The fiscal note is on page 39. Well, Right, Bill? Now, 35 and 36 of the packet, but big picture, eliminating residential property tax was estimated to be about $601 million to set the residential rate to zero. As Mr. Anderson explained, the legislation as constructed didn't reimburse for the exemptions. So we were going to reimburse about $540 million of that 600. So the way the previous bill was, it was a little bit short over time, but we did impose that 2% a little earlier. So there was money to last, for a while. And as prices go up, sales and use tax probably goes up, maybe we'd catch there, but structurally it was maybe a little bit short, but a 2% real estate transfer tax and the 2% sales tax, we were looking at 580 million. What we were going to reimburse based on that legislation was 540 million. So a little higher there, but lower than the estimated 600 million in total. And we will be getting, new data from the CAMA system probably in July sometime. So we'll have some probably new calculations that we can work on to bring, updated information on a lot of these things, but I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to clarify because the numbers were exactly what are close to what I expected. I'm always 5 million off here, 5 million off there. But that being said, so that 540 million you were talking about, that's what basically the residential property tax that was collected after exemptions. So that's that number. That's why you were using that number. Okay. So, and then with these two numbers, with the 2% sales tax and the 2% transfer tax, that's what ends up being that 580 range. So actually above theoretically what the current exemptions would support. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that clearly, and that's accurate. Yes, sir?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Locke, correct.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Mr. Chairman, so that was the first bill on our list, property tax replacement. The next bill on the list on the agenda was residential property tax revisions. And that was not a committee bill. That was a bill, a private bill brought by Senator Hicks. And what that bill did, it's Senate File 110, Mr. Chairman, and that bill created, put residential property in a separate class, similar to the implementation of Amendment A that we discussed earlier, but it did it in a two-tiered system. So for owner-occupied primary residences, it would set the rate at 8.3%. And for all other residential, it would keep that at the current 9.5%. And then on page 3, you can see the definitions there of owner-occupied primary residence, which is where the person resides for 8 months of the applicable tax year, and then the definition of residential property, which is consistent with the definition in the other bill. On page 4, you can see that same change being made, 8.3% for owner-occupied and 9.5% for all other residential. And then on page 5, in the implementation of the mills, these are some of the education mills under 21-13-102, currently set at 25 mills. It would set that rate to 0 mills for residential real property that's occupied by the owner of the property as their primary residence. And it also would repeal an exemption there in Section 2. That's the 25% homeowner exemption. In Section 3, it would have put in some money to the Department of Revenue to implement the act. And that's essentially that bill, Mr. Chairman. All right, and then the third bill on our list, Mr. Chairman, was fair market value on transfer. That was a revenue committee bill, House Bill 73.
You-
Yeah,
Mr. Anderson,
Mr.
can I get you to hold up? Co-Chairman Locke has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, and this might be from Matt, I don't know. I just wanted to go back on this one. And thank you for going through this with us a little bit. But on this one, my recollection, and I could be wrong, but I know Mr. Sackett ran many numbers on this. My recollection was that the impact was in the ballpark of 130 million on this one. And I could be way off, but if you've got a little bit of information on that, that would be helpful for us understanding that. And let me state this correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong. My recollection was that 130 million was roughly the bill that would be handed to the state for the local entities. And if I'm wrong about that, anyway, clarification would be appreciated. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Locke, correct. So on packet page 88 of my property tax memo, so the bill was submitted late for a fiscal note, but we ran these calculations for the discussions. I think big picture, Senate File 110 basically gave owner-occupied houses a reduction. So they reduced, as Mr. Anderson has explained, from 9.5% assessment rate to 8.3%. They also, if owner-occupied residences, paid 0 mills out of the 25 mil school levy. So that was that page 5 change there. They pay 0 mills. So they get a reduction in their assessment rate, and they pay 0 mills of the 25 school mills. But for non-owner occupied housing, that assessment rate stays at 9.5%. They pay 25 of the 25 mills, and they receive a 25% tax increase, basically, because this bill eliminated the 25% property tax exemption. So a number of things going on there. But you were right, 130 million, but that is the impact of the 25 mills going to 0. So there'd be $131 million reduction in funds for schools. So those, foundationally, if we're going to cover school funding, then that would be made up somewhere else. There is a slight increase, though, for the other local entities and whatnot. So in that memo, you might see there's the estimated 12 mills, 6 mills for schools, but also the county mills and all others. So the, special districts, they're going to see a little bit of an increase because of the 25% reduction going away. So big picture, the actual entire reduction is about 101 million. But the 130 goes to schools, but there's a bit of an increase to some of these other entities.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Sackett, and it gets a little tricky in there because of that, the drop to the 8.3, right? So if the 8.3% was not in there, theoretically, you would be fully, for lack of a better term, you'd be fully funding the locals. Is that accurate? But I think that 8.3 still leaves some of those other entities lower by about half. I might be saying that poorly, but I'm trying to understand the difference between the fact that we would remove the 25% completely, but then with the 8.3, there's still a component of that would remain in that calculation. So that's roughly half. I know it's not exactly, but close. Can you explain that a little bit? Because that would be helpful for people to understand, because that was one of the key elements of this, is some of what the locals were worried about. This is putting some of that money back in their pocket, whereas, but that 8.3% adjustment affects that a bit. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Locke, good question. There is some nuances to that, and it gets, like you said, tricky. The reduction from 9.5 to 8.3% only applies to owner-occupied homes. So 70% basically of maybe the residences would qualify. and then they pay the zero mills of the 25 mills for education. But all the other, say 30% of homes that are not owner occupied don't get a reduction in their assessment rate. They still pay the full 25 mills, and they're getting the 25% reduction removed from their property. So there's kind of two things. There's these reductions from the owner occupied housing going on, but there's a 25% increase basically in the tax bill to the non-owner occupied, because they don't get any of those reductions, but they're now paying 25% higher on their properties. So I don't know that it's 100% restoration, but there would definitely be an increase based on these estimates to some of these, like the county 12 mills and the special districts. Some of that would depend very heavily on who got them, the values of those houses, and other things like that, if that makes sense.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, theoretically, though, this year, so in the first year, it was a loss to the non-owner occupied. In this current year, though, if we compared it to this current year where the 25% to the non-owner occupied is lost already, then it would match more closely with this year with that difference, correct? I mean, that, because theoretically, they've already lost that in this year. Now, we were doing it, I know, when we were still looking at last year, but is that accurate? I mean, I'm not missing anything there. I'm just trying to make sure I understand those numbers in my head a little bit, which a lot to understand.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I would say you're tracking. And we also had some nuances last year with the long-term homeowners going away. And now so the nice thing this year, when we get new data, we can run some of these numbers depending on, your guys' decisions. But, it'll be a clean slate in what those calculations will be. But yes, you're correct.
Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for either one of you. Page 3, line 11. When it just talks about a dwelling that can house up to 3 additional families, is just a reference. If I live in a bottom half of an apartment building and 3 families or 2 families and 1 family are renting the other, is that applicable to this then? Or is that a separate category that I just don't see because of limitations of the statute here?
So, Mr. Chairman, that's kind of a distinction between what's considered a residential facility versus like more of a commercial rental property. So if it's 4 or more families, it's a commercial property, where 3 or less, like a townhome with 3 residences in it, it would be a still residential property. So that's all that's doing, Mr. Chairman.
So I was interpreting that correctly. Thank you.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's probably for Mr. Sackett here. Just a quick, back to the 2% transfer tax on that table 2, you've got the valid residential sales over the years, and it's kind of interesting. And I'm just speculating, this is kind of COVID and then post-COVID, so that probably affected these numbers, I assume. But, you go from give or take 12,000 sales in 2021 to, 7,700 sales in 24 and 25. Can you speculate on why that fall off on the number of sales? Is it mainly fixed interest rates, people not wanting to sell their houses? That's about the only thing I can see. Do you have any other comments on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I would agree. I think, that was after all the COVID money and inflation started hitting, and, the Fed increased interest rates, when you got 30-year mortgages up around 7% or something. I think that really slowed down people that had a 3% interest rate and maybe would be thinking about moving. Now you're looking at a 7% interest rate. And so I think that really did slow down the flow of home buying and selling because of those interest rates. There's probably other factors that I haven't thought of, but yeah, I would say that probably had a large effect.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry, Mr. Sackett. You probably said this. When you ran that, you came up with that 88 or 90 million or 92, I can't remember. I probably looked at the number and went blank here. Was that on the 7725 number? Was that roughly on the 7,700 homes? Was that the estimate on that?
Mr. Chairman Locke, yeah. So that was based on the residential sales in 2025.
Okay.
I did run the average over that entire time period, and it was actually a little bit lower. It was around 86 million if you averaged the years in the table. So the 2% real estate transfer would be about 86 million on average over that time period. But as you can see, there's some for volatility within that, dependent on sales and interest rates and a variety of things. So, but yeah, that the number in there is based on the 2025.
All right, so Mr. Chairman, so the third thing on the list here was the fair market value on transfer. That was a bill the committee looked at last year, House Bill 73. You recall this one, it really gets started at the bottom of page 3, and it's establishing a new method for determining the value of residential property. And so over to page 4, and this would have begun in January 1 of 2028. Fair market value of residential property would be determined in accordance with this paragraph. And there's kind of different categories here. For any residential property that was last acquired before December 31st, 2019, the base year value would be the fair market value of that property on January 1 of 2019. And then under 2, for residential property that was acquired between January 1 of 2020 and December 31st of 2027, that base year value would be the fair market value of the property on January 1 of the year the property was acquired. Under 3, that's for anything on or after January 1, 2028. There'd be a presumption that the fair market value is the price paid to acquire that property. Then under subparagraph 4 on page 5, that explains the reasons why that price paid wouldn't be used and the fair market value would instead be used. And that's either if the presumption that the presumption was rebutted by showing that the price paid was not fair market value because either a party was acting under undue influence or the terms were not negotiated at arm's length. Or under 2, the owner of the property does not submit the information to enable the assessor to establish the price. Then under subparagraph B on page 6, that base year value that was determined under A is adjusted. Under I there, the Department of Revenue is required to come up with an index to determine if residential property values are increasing or decreasing. If across the state, if they're decreasing, the value of that property is reduced at the rate determined by the index. If it's increasing, then the base year value is adjusted by an inflation factor of the lesser of 2% or the rate of the consumer price index, again, whichever is less. And then under 2, that base year value can also be adjusted to account for increases in the value of the property caused by new construction or significant additions to the property. That's determined by the construction costs, either actual costs or if those are not available based on average construction costs in the state. Under C, that amount shall then consist, that adjusted amount is then the fair market value. And then that continues until the property is transferred to a new person. And each time that's transferred, the property is revalued at under subparagraph A. Subparagraph D requires the department to adopt rules, including rules to establish the price paid to acquire the property and rules on construction costs, rules related to significant additions to the property. And subparagraph E are the definitions. For the most part, the price paid is the actual full amount paid to acquire. Residential real property matches some of the other similar definitions in the other bills we've looked at today. Significant addition is a construction of residential real property that adds habitable space, includes construction where all or a portion of the dwelling is demolished and reconstructed, but shall not include the finishing of an unfinished portion of the existing dwelling. Then in 4 there, it excludes some things where it's not considered a transfer. Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I got a question on this.
Yes, sir.
Let's say I do an addition to my house and I do the work myself and don't have a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
Am I still paying taxes for what a contractor would cost? Or is it going to be my cost?
Mr. Chairman, I think as the bill is currently written or was written last year, I think that would be, because that wouldn't be an arm's length, they would use the average statewide construction costs to determine that. Yeah. So then, yeah.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Oh, sorry, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And quick question on that. My recollection was, and I'm sorry, I forgot bits and pieces of this one, but in terms of there was a kind of a concept of significant change. I don't know if that's changed to the footprint. Can you speak to that briefly? Because that was one of the things that we're trying to say. The intent was not to say, I'm going to make a modification. I'm going to, I'm going to fix my finish my basement. I'm going to finish a room in the house or something. I think the intent was kind of to move toward, the house was expanded, the footprint was changed or that. Can you talk a little bit to that just to make sure we're all clear on that? Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So that's the definition of significant addition. It's at the bottom of page 9. So it says it's any construction that adds habitable square feet. It includes construction where all or a portion of the dwelling is demolished and reconstructed, but does not include finishing an unfinished portion of the dwelling. So finishing a basement would not be a significant addition for purposes of this bill. So, Mr. Chairman, then, so continuing on page 10, then there's just some types of transfers that are excluded where the property would not be revalued, including a transfer between spouses or between a parent and the parent's child, a transfer to pursuant to a court order, such as a settlement agreement or a decree of divorce, transfer of property to a trust established for the benefit of the owner, a transfer to a corporation, if the immediately preceding owner is a shareholder, a donation of real property to a religious or charitable organization, or any other transfer established by the department by rule that should not be an acquisition due to the relationship of the parties. Over to page 12 then, the department and the Board of Equalization are required to adopt rules not later than January 1. And then the section 3 of the bill was contingent on a
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Anderson. So just real quick, the way I read this, or the way I believe this was intended to work, is on those transfers. The intent is that it's not a change. So for example, I'm going to oversimplify. Let's say you bought it many years ago. You're now at that. Let's just say every year it goes up 2%. So the point is that on these transfers, it's basically continues at that, let's say 2% a year or whatever that index is, ongoing. That's the difference. The baseline's not reset. That's the proper definition here, explanation, correct? So it would continue to go up at whatever the index said it should based on the previous purchase.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So if it was one of those excluded transfers, that transfer would not establish a new base year value for purposes of the statute. So you keep the same base year. So that's what I had on these three bills. The next one was the 2% real estate transfer. We didn't have a bill on that, and Mr. Sackett had some information on that, but that's what I had, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Sackett can add anything additional.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sackett, so I don't know if you've dove into this bill. The fair market value on transfer. This one is in my opinion, a bit harder exactly to calculate the impacts. Do you have decent impact or good estimates on this one? Because I would kind of like to hear them and hear what that looks like. Because one of the things that this, to some degree, would do is it would, I guess you'd have to make a decision, but certainly it would remove the 25%. One might even argue that the 4% would change now because it's setting a new cap. And so we would obviously have to talk about that and make sure that was clear. But I didn't know if you'd had a chance to do a true analysis, making some of those assumptions. And if you did an analysis, which of those assumptions did you make?
Chairman Locke, Chairman McEwen, there is an estimate. It's on page 24 and page 25 of the property tax memo. DOR and I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to work through this. We tried a number of different ways. What we came up with was about a $290 million or maybe $298 million reduction. But if you look at the top of page 25, it says, admittedly, it is impossible to go back in time and recreate the last 7 years of property tax growth and actual sales for all residential properties in the state. So what we really tried to do, a lot of this is shifting back to, say, 2019, right? So before COVID. So we tried to basically move back in time to 2019 and then project forward with a lower growth rate. So that's where that number comes from, that 298 million. We tried to go back to 2019, and then instead of, some of these 20% increases, we used a lower increase. So that's where those came from. But admittedly, this is a very hard bill to try to estimate the fiscal impact, because we also don't know what transactions would have happened, what houses would have sold, what those house values would have been. And looking forward, we don't know how many sales, right? And what, if you sell a $35 million house in Teton County, that's, very different than, the rest of the state type thing. So there's a lot of nuances to this. So that is a number. If Mr. Giel has any other comments to this, he's welcome to come up, but it's a number, it's an estimate, but it's a tough one to get to, because we don't know what happened over the last 7 years or what will happen, because this is very specific to actual sales, right? And so.
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Sackett. Okay, now we're gonna look at other property tax reforms. Representative Chestick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now for something completely different. I have an idea. It's a big idea, and what I'm hoping to accomplish today is to start a conversation about a fundamental rethinking about the way we do property tax assessments in Wyoming. So let me kind of set up how we got here, what the problem is, and then I'll suggest a solution, which is going to take some time. It would require a constitutional amendment, so we're several years out from actually implementing this if the committee chooses to go forward and do this. I'm hoping that we'll have a chance to study this more in the future, but let me explain the idea. But first, let me set up what the problem is. Real estate taxes make up about half of the taxes paid by an ordinary citizen. There's other sales tax, other things, but real estate property tax is the big tax that most citizens pay. So when we have rapid tax increases in real estate taxes, that's a big problem for our citizens. A few years ago, some parts of the state experienced extreme rapid real estate tax increases that nobody voted for. Right? These tax increases, nobody voted for them. The legislature didn't vote for them. Local government didn't vote for them. The voters didn't vote for them. They just happened because of the way tax assessments are done in Wyoming. They're based on on real estate values, fair market value. So when the market goes up rapidly, taxes go up rapidly. And there's nothing we can do about that to stop that. That just happens. The problem is that a lot of those increases happened in irregular ways. Some counties had huge increases. Others had modest increases or very small increases. But because of the very large increases in some places, the state had to come up with some kind of relief system. And you've had a long conversation already this morning about all the things that we've done to try and provide some tax relief. But the problem here is that the tax revenues are set by the state. So the only tool we have to fix that is a statewide solution. So we've come up with this hodgepodge of exemptions, the 4% cap, and there's ideas to tweak them some more. And we're talking about a lot of the conversation we've had this morning has been all about those programs that we've implemented. And you've heard how confusing that is. I'm confused by it. I don't understand it all. I think we're all confused by it. And never mind our constituents who are confused by it. So the confusion is a problem all by itself. But I suggest that there's more than just confusion. The problem is much bigger than just confusion. First of all, because we have a statewide revenue system, but localized expenditures, the local governments have to provide services to their constituents based on the revenue we give them. And if we cut their revenue, they have less money to provide services. So we get credit for cutting taxes, yay us, but they get blamed for cutting services because they don't have the revenue. And that's become a huge problem in the smaller communities. The hardship counties in particular are having a hard time making ends meet because of the statewide solution that we're trying to oppose to address local problems. The other major problem that has come up, I think now, is that we are starting to get an assessment system that is unconstitutional. The Constitution, the Wyoming Constitution, Article 15, Section 11, title of the section, uniformity of assessment. We are getting away, everything we do, every tax relief program, every exemption, every cap, everything we do is taking us farther and farther away from uniform taxation. Some property owners get exemptions, others don't. Some forget to apply for them, others do it. Some don't qualify. Some of these exemptions stack on each other, some overlap, some you qualify. It's become a hodgepodge, it's become a very complicated but potentially unconstitutional mess because we no longer have uniform taxation. The 4% cap, for example, by itself is created. It sounds like that was uniform, right? 4% for everybody. No, it's not. That's not how it actually works on the street. Some properties that are inflating rapidly get the 4% cap. You know, they go up more than 4% every year, they get a cap. Other properties don't get that cap. They're not inflating that rapidly. So the highly valuable properties that have the rapid inflation are getting some relief where other people are not. With the result of we're shifting the tax burden away from those high value properties onto the lower value properties that aren't inflating as quickly. So that's becoming non-uniform. Lots of ways in which the system that we have is creating a non-uniform system of property tax assessment. So we need, I'd like to have us think about, we talked some more tinkering. We're good at tinkering. We've done a lot of tinkering over the last couple of sessions to try and provide some kind of relief. And it's, as we've seen, it's created this uneven mess, and it's a very complicated situation. The solution, yes, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You're saying that if a house doesn't go up 4%, they're not getting any relief, but if it goes up more than 4%, then somebody's getting relief?
So if a property goes up 8% in a year, their tax increase is capped at 4%. If somebody's property goes up 3%, they pay the whole thing. So their property continues to be taxed at fair value, but the property that's gone up 8% is now being assessed at 4% less than fair value. They've got a 4%, whatever the inflation was on that house gets capped at 4. So whatever's above 4, they get relief for. So if your property doesn't go up that fast, you're getting no relief. You're still paying the taxes based on your full value, but properties that inflate more than 4% get the top. Anything over 4% is cut off of their assessment, and therefore they are paying less than fair value by whatever that difference is. So, and that's creating issues. It is creating issues for our assessors. So the solution that I did I answer your question?
Well, yeah, but I guess I take exception to you saying they're not getting the same relief when they're getting the same 4% cap. If it went up 5, then they'd save 1.
Right. But the people who don't go up that much don't get any relief. That's the difference. That's the point I'm trying to make. And that's what's creating the imbalance. And over time, year over year, as these properties continue to inflate rapidly, they're getting higher and higher relief that other properties aren't getting. It's shifting the tax burden gradually to properties that aren't inflating as fast, which are the people that we probably want to help the most. So.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think that statement is in the context of fair market value.
Right.
Because you got to have a framework for that statement. And I think that's it. The concept is some are getting relief from fair market value, some are not. So it's really the baseline assessment process we've got implemented right now that causes that. Let me say it that way.
Okay. Okay.
If that's accurate.
I think it's accurate.
Certainly.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So the solution that I have, want to propose to you is something called base year assessments. And this is a system that I'm familiar with. I've borrowed this idea from Pennsylvania, which does a base year assessment system. And I was hoping to have somebody from Pennsylvania able to talk about it. I was unable to get them to attend here, but before I went into academia, I was a practicing lawyer in Pennsylvania. And for 18 years, I was the chief civil attorney for a county, a large county. And I advised the assessment office, I advised the assessment board. So I'm very familiar with how assessments work in Pennsylvania. The concept of a base year assessment is that you pick so 1 year you do a countywide reassessment at fair market value. Everybody gets assessed at the same fair market value for a year. And then you freeze assessments at that base year for some period of time. Now, Pennsylvania has no limit on how long you keep that, and that's a problem. They know that's a problem. I would suggest that we say maybe 5 years, pick a number. And that's some of the detail we can deal with later. But for some period of time, your assessed value doesn't change. Unless you do an addition to the property that gets added in, or there's a new property that's been built, a new house that comes online or whatever, those get added, but they're added based on the base year values. So if I have a base year of 2026 and in 2030, I build a new house, I'm going to go use 2026 pricing books or market conditions to evaluate the property. So that gets added to the base at the same level as the 2026 homes. So you create an assessed value that doesn't change over time. And that way inflation has nothing to say about what your taxes are. Inflation does not matter. Your assessed value is what matters. And that is fixed for some period of time. And then you adjust it at the end of the 5 or 6 years, whatever the period is. What that does, like I said, it takes inflation out of the picture. Now, the costs of running the local governments don't get frozen because inflation happens to them. Costs go up everywhere. Inflation is the thing. So in order to allow the taxing bodies to continue to provide the services, you have to give them the power to set mills, to create, so they have the power to levy taxes at a level that they need to balance the budget. And this gives local governments some authority, and it solves the problem that we have exacerbated with our tax relief programs. The problem that we cut taxes, they have to cut services, and there's no conversation between how much services are the people willing to pay for. And that conversation needs to happen at the local level. We have all said many times, and I believe it sincerely in the deepest part of my heart, that the best government is that's closest to the people. So when if somebody in a local county, local government thinks that taxes are too high for local services, they don't have to go to Cheyenne and talk to people who have never met, they've never met, and those people have never even been to the community, and they have to try and convince me to lower their taxes. No, they go to City Hall and say, hey, City Council, hey, Mr. Mayor, I think my taxes are too high, please cut my taxes. It's a local problem. And then the mayor can say, okay, tell me what services you want to cut. How can I balance the budget now? You know, if you don't want to pay taxes, that's fine, but we have to cut services too because we have to balance our budget. So how do we do it? So the conversations about balancing taxes and services happens at the local level where the services are delivered, and that's the best place to do them. So by using the base year assessment, you do have to give the local governments some power to raise taxes. And then at the end of whatever period we pick, 5 years, 7 years, whatever the number is, we do a revaluation of the whole county. And it's that, I do think we need to set a time limit on that. Maybe it's a range between 5 and 7, whatever it is. At the end of that time, there's a revaluation. We go back to fair market value for everybody, and which would, with the additional requirement that the taxing body needs to cut their millage. Because there's going to be inflation, and we don't want to give everybody a giant tax increase, because that's what we're trying to solve. The taxing authorities must cut their mills so that the revenue they bring in the year after the reassessment is done is within a few percentage points of what the prior year was. So they can get a little bit of inflation in that reassessment year, but they're not going to get a giant tax increase because property values have gone up. So that puts a cap on the assessed value, the tax revenue that is generated by the higher values. So that's how the system works. I think it solves the problem of inflation causing gigantic tax increases. So people will have to vote for it. And tax increases can happen, tax decreases can happen based on local conversations, depending on how much government the local people want and are willing to pay for. And that's a conversation that we don't need to be part of at the state level. This is all local government stuff. The local authorities need to have the power to balance their own budget. So that's the idea that I have. I know it's a big change in the way we do things. And I do think it's an idea that is worth further consideration. I don't have a bill draft. It's going to require a constitutional amendment. But it's going to, what I'd love to see is have some kind of a working group formed with members of this committee and stakeholders, the revenue office, the assessor's office, WAM, the county commissioners, maybe the school boards association, lots of stakeholders come together and have a conversation about this and see if we can come up with an idea that how to amend the Constitution, how to start towards this new way of doing things. So that's the idea that I have. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for joining us today, Representative Chesick. Can you talk to me about what happens at the reassessment? Are there large jumps at that time? Are there large mill increases? What does that look like?
So in the year of the reassessment, what that does, it basically rebalances the properties within the county. So within a county, some areas are going to have inflated more than other areas. So it's going to rebalance according to the fair market value on the year of reassessment. So the total value, the assessed value of the county is going to go up. And that's why we have a requirement that whatever the assessed value is, you have to reduce them. The local governments all have to reduce their mills down to a point where they can only bring in X percent more than they brought in the year prior to the reassessment. So that's going to prevent a gigantic tax increase. There will be some discrepancies within the county because properties who have inflated, some will get bigger increases than others will. Some may get reductions because of the way that the market has shifted within the county. So we're still basically working off of fair market value, but we're just rebalancing it every 5 years or whatever number of years we pick as part of this process.
Representative Riggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Chesnick. So what about the mills that go to the state, or for example, school mills?
Yeah.
So how would you address that?
Schools are a special problem. They're a special situation because there is a need to balance, equalize school district revenue so that school students, whichever school you go to, you get a good education. And there's so the recalibration we just did, school finances are a separate problem. And maybe maybe we keep the school finance system the way it is. I think the main concern that I have with this proposal is local government, county government. Schools, we could talk about that, but I think that might be we might carve that out of this system.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just for clarification, so, and I think you said this, but I just want to be sure. The base year, you don't have an escalator in the in-between years.
No.
You allow the local entities to adjust their mills. So the second part of that, thank you for that clarification. So the second part of that is, do the local entities have, do we at the state level set boundaries? Do the local entities have to go to the voters for those changes? I guess I would like to understand that piece better, because I'm inclined to, well, I better not go there. I would like to understand your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is a policy choice that whatever this body decides to do, the legislature decides to do, that's a policy choice. We could theoretically say the local elected officials, and there should always be elected officials voting on tax increases. At a minimum, it's an elected official or a voter who decides what taxes are. We could say local officials have X, you can vote on tax increases up to some percentage, and beyond that, if you need more than that, go to the voters. We could do it all, go to the voters. That's a policy consideration that we need to talk about. But, you know, yeah, so basically it's, you can do it either way. You can do it any way you want at this point.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so that's an interesting point. And so, yeah, and then you had mentioned that at the reassessment year, so whatever, let's just say 5 years, the way you kind of brought it up. The policy choice there is to say that mills would have to adjust to make sure it did not go up beyond a certain percentage there. That's the mentality of that as well, correct? Yes. Thank you.
Representative Lean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the good representative's point about making sure that this is recalibrated and completed, what happens if it doesn't happen? So recalibration is a great example that there's a legislature that couldn't agree and it wasn't done for a number of years. Here we are talking about a potential reform for property taxes. What would happen if there was no reassessment done at the 5-year mark or the 3-year mark or whatever term level we set as the policy decision?
There we go. Am I on? That would be a local reassessment. Every county, and you could do it so that not every county does it at the same time. You could say, the limitation in the Constitution could be, but you must, as a matter of the constitutional law, you must do a reassessment between 5 and 7 years or 5 and 10 years or whatever. You could do it that way. You could pick a number, whatever, but it could be a constitutional requirement that you must do it. It's got to be done, right? And it's going to be done at the local level, and it's going to be done based on the data that the assessors have been collecting for all 5 of those years. I mean, their day jobs don't change that much, frankly. They're still going to be in the field doing their field work. They're still going to be doing the additions. They're going to be doing the subtractions. The basic stuff, the data they're gathering right now, rather than reassess every year, they reassess every 5 years. So they'll have the data to do it with. So I don't see recalibration is a very different kind of animal. So I don't see that being a problem, actually.
Now, I want to make sure I heard you. You kind of said we'd leave schools alone. They'd be outside the process.
Again, that's a policy choice. We could decide to leave that system in place the way it is, so it doesn't change. So the change I'm talking about, I think, should for sure cover local governments, county governments, whether it covers schools is a policy choice. Yet then if we exclude schools from this process, they still, the school taxes would still be based on the assessed value that are being generated by this new system. But who decides to raise taxes or raise mills? That's a decision that we could leave it the way it is, or we could give it to the school boards. Whatever, again, those are policy choices that we need to have a lot more conversation about.
Reason I asked that question is 70 cents of every property tax dollar we collect goes to the schools. So if we fence the schools off, we're just talking about 30% of the revenue. And I think, I could be all wet, but county commissioners and the city can move the mill levies around already, how they see fit, can't they?
There's limitations on, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. There are limitations on mills that local governments can assess. I think a lot of them are already at their max. Carving out the schools, again, that's a conversation. The school taxes would still benefit from the freeze, right? So this thing does two things. It freezes assessed value so that inflation doesn't create giant tax increases, and the school taxes would benefit from that. The question then is, if the schools need more money, where does it come from? Do the school boards have the power to assess, to raise the millage, or is that a state decision? That's a policy decision that we can make, and we have to have that conversation. But the school tax dollar amount that the individual pays will get the benefit of the freeze because the assessed value doesn't go up for 5 years.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so there was a similar concept pitched, and I'm going to say maybe 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, where, and the difference was the baseline concept was similar, where they picked a baseline. I think they fair market value baselined it. And I want to say it was in Arizona. Assessor Meyer discussed this, I think, again, 3 years ago, for those of you who were here. The concept was similar to what you're proposing. The difference was not the changes in the mills, but actually the concept came with a potential escalator based on inflation, but with a cap. So it was very similar in that you would baseline the mills. The cities and counties still have some mill flexibility where they can make adjustments. We would not theoretically change that. But what it did come with is if inflation was up X, that cap concept would still be there where it couldn't go over X, but it would go up to those numbers. Again, each year there would not be a fair market value assessment. It would just go up by the escalator. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. It's another minor, well, I shouldn't say minor, it's another deviation to your concept, but it's kind of one of those things that stuck in my head at the time, and I would be curious your thoughts on that. The only difference being you wouldn't give them significantly more flexibility in the mills. They'd use their current mill flexibility, but then there would be this escalator that would be capped, but every year not a fair market value calculation. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm not quite sure I understand the concept, but it does sound similar to what I'm proposing. And again, I think that's part of the conversation. We could, if we take this conversation further, which I'd like to see this go further beyond just today. I'd love to learn more about that system. I'm not familiar with it, but it does sound similar to what I'm proposing.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Dockstader.
Before we close out here, the space year assessment, Representative Chesnick, what's the closest thing we have out there for an example? Somebody else using it, some other state?
What I'm proposing is what's done in Pennsylvania. And I think there's other states that have similar situations. I'm familiar with Pennsylvania, having practiced and done this work for assessment offices in Pennsylvania. So that's the comparator state that I'm using.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chairman Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Dockstader. My recollection was that I think it was Arizona that had that other concept, which was somewhat similar. So, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Like to open this up for public comment. If anybody has something they want to say, please come forward. Okay. We have anybody online?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Well, with that, we'll break for lunch. I'll see y'all back here at 1:30.